Welcome to this video, guys. Today we're talking about AI, LLMs, and more importantly, open sourced and closed source LLMs. In this video, we're just going to broaden our knowledge of LLMs, look into open source and closed source models, defining what they are, and then understanding them so we can explore them a little bit more. We're also going to go through a really useful tool that I found when thinking about closed and open source models, and it has some other great uses in building your AI knowledge and skill set as well. By the end of this video, you will understand a little bit more about the LLM models out there. Of course, understand what open and closed models have to offer you, the benefits and drawbacks. And by the end, I'll have a recommendation for you and myself on where I think this kind of needs to go in the near term and long term future. Just a quick introduction to me on this channel. I am Roshan, a chartered accountant with a career in corporate finance advisory, accounting and finance. I built this channel so I can take you on this learning journey with me as I look to upskill and educate myself on AI and the way it's going to impact me and the things I'm doing in the future. I was not a first adopter of AI. Actually, I was against using it for many reasons and still am in parts of my life where I don't feel like I need to. But this channel is aimed at taking you on that journey with me. I talk about AI and I also will be talking about other tools I use like Excel, because for me, ultimately, this journey ends up in understanding AI and bridging it with the context of what I need to use it for in my life, which is accounting and finance solutions. If you want to go on that journey with me, you can hit subscribe and also go pop your email address in on my website. When I start to write something, you'll be the first to know. So if we just start by formally defining them, open source LLMs like Llama provide public access to model weights and code, allowing for high customization, data privacy, and lower operational costs, but require technical expertise to manage. Closed source LLMs like GPT and Claude are proprietary, hosted by providers offering top-tier performance, ease of use, and support, but cost more and limit visibility. I think it's really useful to have these definitions, but when understanding these definitions, I guess in simple terms, effectively closed source models are where someone has developed code and they don't share that code with you, but you pay to access the services and the results that code provides you. And that's ChatGPT, that's Claude, that's Gemini. You don't get to access the code that they have created. Whereas open source models like Llama, and I believe there's one called Quen as well, which we're going to see in just a second, give you access to their code, and there's drawbacks and benefits of both, which we're going to just get into. I also think one useful way to think about open source and closed source models that you might have seen is to do with your operating system. We have Macs that run on the Apple operating system, and then we have Windows laptops that run on Windows. These are closed source operating systems because they don't share the code with us. You don't have any person in the world that can start to develop stuff in Windows and Macintosh. That's left to the people that work for those companies. But you do have a company you may have heard of called Linux. And Linux are a company I know of because my dad was a bit of an IT geek and he loves this stuff. It's a company that provides an open source operating system. So you can load it on your laptop and you can actually toggle and mess around with the code. And some of the useful things around this that I actually learned by just watching and observing my dad was that there were workarounds that would come to the market a lot quicker for open source models, because you would just have some guy that wants to do something in Linux who just develops the code and runs it and then puts it out there in the world for you to download it. There's obviously bigger risks of things like this because you're downloading code from potentially unknown sources, but there are also benefits if it's done carefully and mindfully. We're going to get into more of that later on. Before we dive into the drawbacks and benefits of open and closed source models, I just wanted to show you this really useful tool I found in terms of actually identifying open and closed source LLMs. But actually it's a really useful tool and you may use it as something in the future in your AI learning journey. It's called OpenRouter, and when we have all these LLMs we're talking about, and I'm just going to show you probably some more that you may not have heard of, we have to have something called an API key to access this thing. So ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, Llama, all these other ones, you will have to go and create an API key and tell whatever you're building that this is how to access that code for that piece of software for that company. But OpenRouter, from what I understand, offers a central API key. So you get one API key, and through this company OpenRouter, you're able to go and pick the various models that you need, whether it's ChatGPT, whether it's Claude, whether it's Gemini, or anyone else through OpenRouter itself. And the reason I explain that is because the data we're about to look at is OpenRouter giving us a ranking based on all the traffic that goes through its software. So this is not data based on all the interactions going on in the world. This is based on the volume of traffic going through OpenRouter. And they give us a leaderboard, which I think is really useful. So AI model rankings, and they tell us the most used LLMs in any 1 week. And the reason I think this is interesting, because they clearly identify free models. So Qwen seems to be up there at number 7. And I think it ranks quite a lot higher in different weeks as well. You've got Neomotron. You don't have Llama on here for some reason. I think that may be because it didn't make its way into the top 10 rankings. And also, perhaps there's a nuance to using Llama on OpenRouter that makes it a less favorable choice. I don't know. But the useful thing here is to actually grow our knowledge of LLMs here. So we've got the free ones that we can see, that are the open source models. And if you're using something like OpenRouter, you may be able to go into plug into those. We're going to talk about the benefits and drawbacks of closed and open in just a second. But you've got other names here, which I thought was really interesting in terms of growing and expanding my knowledge of who is out there offering LLM services that I need to consider potentially. There's DeepSeek, there's Claude, which we know about, and this is the Opus model. I've talked about this in my last video, which was an introduction to LLMs, where you just have one provider, but they have different models that might be good at doing different things or just a future iteration of a previous model. You've got Minimax. You've got Gemini, which is Google. You've got Qwen. You've got Maimo, I believe. Neuromotron by Nvidia. And you've got Gemini. And then if we expand, and down here you've got, obviously, you've got GPT, ChatGPT from OpenAI, and you've got some others. I think this is just really interesting from the perspective of understanding that this is obviously just based on OpenRouter traffic and getting an idea of more LLMs in your knowledge base. And potentially in the future, you may want to use OpenRouter if you don't want to come up with an API for every individual LLM you want to use. Really quickly, because I found it useful, so I'm just giving you a flash tour of this. You may, in the beginning, decide you want to follow the herd, and you get an idea here of what people are using. You've got some benchmarks here in terms of the cost of these LLMs, and then the actual, I think this is an intelligence bar on the left. You've then got something that tells you about the speed of LLMs, because sometimes you just may want to produce something really quickly in terms of an agent that's looking something, and it's more about volume of transactions, and it doesn't have to be that intelligent. Well, then maybe speed's more important. So you've got GPT, which seems to be the cheapest and fastest out of what this data is showing us. You've got Llama that actually popped up here, but that's fastest by Grog. Interesting. Okay, so let's keep going. Categories down here. The thing I found interesting here with category was if you are producing something and you don't know what people are using in that sector, say for finance, I can click on finance, and dataset tells me that people using and making finance products tend to use Claude, which is actually along the lines of my understanding of what they would be using, which is interesting. There we go. That's having a look at OpenRouter. The rest of this, I wanted to talk about the benefits and drawbacks of using closed and open source models. Now, it's pretty clear that if you use something that's open source, it's going to be free. So it's going to be really cost effective. But just like with the example I gave around Linux as an operating system, there is a huge learning curve to using open source models. And most of us that don't have that much knowledge on programming or just working with open source software are going to find it really hard and be really limited when we try and kick off our journey in AI there. And this is going to be way too much to learn and way too much to know, in my opinion. When it comes to LLMs, these do seem a little bit more plug and play, so it may not be as difficult as trying to figure out Linux, but I don't know the answer to that question right now, and something definitely to explore in future videos. Similarly to what I said earlier, I think with open models, you're going to see greater and better solutions coming to market quicker, because people are just going to be developing solutions for themselves and sharing that with you. So you can find novel solutions to problems a lot sooner, in my experience, when talking and looking at open software versus closed software. I think the ability to run this code locally is a really important one. Something I actually didn't talk about here when looking at these rankings, and I don't know if it pops out to you, but if you've looked at DeepSeek, if you've looked at Minimax and some of these others, these are actually Chinese held entities, companies that are owned by Chinese companies. So DeepSeek is owned by Alibaba, and Minimax, I believe, has some investment potentially from Chinese corporate and is based out somewhere in China. But the one thing I noticed when looking at this is that most of the AI developers are either in America or in China. And there are huge implications of where data is being stored when it comes to big corporate operations. In the UK, we have something called GDPR, which is throughout Europe. And when data is being managed around personal data, generally in Europe, it's considered quite safe around companies that have the same GDPR legislation. But if data is then being stored outside it with perhaps servers in America, China, and around the world, you're going to get into a data infringement issue, and that's going to get companies into a lot of trouble. So you may want to consider the use of open source software in the future, where you need to be more in control of where the calculations are being made, where the memory is being held, and where something is actually being hosted on a server. Of course, when it comes to closed source models like ChatGPT, Claude, and Gemini, they are built and ready to go. They, of course, come with a cost, but there's a significantly reduced learning curve. These pieces of software are actually built for volume and to serve mass people who have little knowledge on some of this stuff when it comes to the back end of programming. So you can get into these tools much quicker and start doing things way faster, which you can see online. People are building agents. People are going in and having conversations and asking these tools for advice or to do research on their behalf, and it just seems a lot easier. And of course, with cost comes some expectations. So you expect these things to be performing a lot higher and be easier to implement too. Ultimately, I think using closed source to begin with is going to reduce your stress levels from having to learn a lot of new things quite considerably. And as you can imagine, that's probably going to be part of my recommendation later. I think the final part to consider is that when you go into something like Claude and GPT, they are the full package. So they've considered things like security and privacy risks, which may not fully answer all the questions you need, but at least it's been considered. When you go to open source piece of software, you are responsible for all the different pieces you need to think about when building and using these products. And security and privacy may be a layer that is not taken care of within these models that you need to think about and build out. And that could be a little bit difficult for someone who doesn't know what they're doing, or a lot difficult. The reality actually probably is. So that's it for this video. And I hope it's built your knowledge base around open and closed source models, even if you're probably leaning quite heavily one way. My recommendation for most people is going to be leaning towards closed source models because you're going to get started much quicker. It's going to be a lot less stressful. And that just means you're going to go further before hitting that resistance barrier. That means you stop and start to feel a little bit scared and a little bit daunted on your AI journey, which I can completely relate to. I think having an idea of open source in the future is definitely worth knowing about, and hopefully what this video covered is a good intro to that. Because depending on what you're developing and depending on your networks that develop in the future, you may consider using an open source piece of software because you know coders, you know people that use these things, and the solution to have more control over the source code, where these things are hosted and how you build them, might be exactly what you need to serve yourself and potentially serve a client. Guys, if you're enjoying this video and you want to continue going on the learning journey with me, which I'm going to take you on, please hit subscribe and go and put your email address on my website if you want to hear more from me when I start to write something. I'm going to be building my first AI agent soon, and I'm going to break that down and take you on that journey with me too. That's the end of this video, guys. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.